My name is Jim Birnbaum. I'm the Diocesan Attorney for the Diocese of La Crosse, and I've had the privilege of being the Diocesan Attorney for approximately the last 25 years. In addition to that, I practice law in La Crosse, I'm married with 2 sons, and I'm a member of the Child Sexual Abuse Review Board. The issue of child sexual abuse is a serious issue for all of society. Our recently deceased Holy Father, Pope John Paul II, expressed it succinctly. Child sexual abuse is a crime, and it's an appalling sin in the eyes of God. And today what I'm going to be talking to you about is I'm going to be talking to you about how the Diocese of La Crosse and its procedures respond to allegations of child sexual abuse. And I also want to talk about the law and what the law requires us to do. So first, let's talk a little bit about the Diocese of La Crosse procedures and policies. When I was asked back in 1980 by then Bishop John Paul to address the issue of child sexual abuse, one of the first tasks he assigned me was to develop policies and procedures to address any type of accusation of child sexual abuse to protect children. And as all of you know, Bishop John Paul, I did what I was told. And so from 1980 all the way down to the present time, the Diocese of La Crosse has had policies and procedures in place dealing with accusations of child sexual abuse. In 1995, Bishop Raymond Burke was appointed Bishop of the Diocese of La Crosse, and one of the first acts he engaged in was to convene a commission to study our previous procedures dealing with accusations of abuse and to codify what had been both our policies and our practices that had gone on for approximately the last 20 years. And what culminated in 1997 then was a policy and procedure for the Diocese of La Crosse dealing with all accusations of sexual abuse, including accusations of child sexual abuse. In 2002, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, as a collective group, addressed this tragic issue of child sexual abuse and culminated in the adoption of the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People. And this is the document which they adopted, a document which is available to you if you are interested. And part of that document requires dioceses to adopt specific procedures dealing exclusively with accusations of child sexual abuse. And the Diocese of La Crosse did that, and Bishop Burke promulgated these policies, which we refer to as the Green Book, in 2003. And all of you, as persons who have contact with the diocese, either as employees or agents or volunteers, need to see and receive a copy of the Green Book and familiarize yourself with its terms. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to spend a little time talking to you about the procedures that are contained in the Green Book and how you can make a complaint of child sexual abuse involving the Diocese of La Crosse. The Diocese of La Crosse child sexual abuse reporting procedures have been in place since before even the adoption of the Charter, but I want to refer them to you so that you understand the process that's followed. First of all, in the Diocese of La Crosse, all reports are made directly to the diocesan bishop. The bishop is made personally aware of any complaints of child sexual abuse at the time they are made. At the time that the complaint is received, we analyze the matter to determine and make sure that we comply with all civil law reporting requirements in cooperation with authorities. If necessary, immediate protective action is taken if, in fact, it involves any risk to children. An immediate investigation is conducted. A victim assistance coordinator is offered to the person who makes the accusation. And the diocese appoints, and the bishop appoints, a representative for both the person who makes the accusation and also for the person who is accused. The investigation then proceeds, and if the accusation is not admitted, the matter is referred then to the Child Sexual Abuse Review Board, which Ellen Thorne will describe for you after I finish. If the accusation is then either admitted or sufficiently confirmed as it goes through the Diocesan Child Sexual Abuse Review Board, then 3 things automatically happen. First of all, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith is notified, and that's the congregation in Rome that supervises these kinds of matters. Secondly, the perpetrator is permanently removed from ministry. And thirdly, depending upon the circumstances, assistance may be offered to the victims that's appropriate to what the accusation is. The process is a confidential process. Confidentially is not designed to protect and conceal information, but designed to assist individuals to make reports of sometimes very difficult issues. There are several ways in which a person can bring these to the attention of the diocese. First of all, they can call the diocesan telephone number and make the report. Secondly, the Diocese of La Crosse has a diocesan website, and that website contains the complaint form and other information how to file a complaint of this nature. And finally, distributed out in the diocese, in addition to copies of the Green Book, are pamphlets which contain the complaint forms that you could complete if you have a concern about child sexual abuse. I've now described for you the diocesan response to what the Holy Father indicated was an appalling sin in the eyes of God. Now I want to talk to you about what the law requires us to do. As most states in this country, Wisconsin has a mandatory reporting requirement when accusations of child sexual abuse occur. And what the law basically says is this, is if you are what's called a mandatory reporter, if you have reasonable cause to suspect that a child seen in the course of your professional duties has been or may be the subject of sexual abuse, you shall, and underscore the word shall, report that matter to the local county authorities. And so what I want to talk to you about then is how this law fits in with the procedures of the Diocese of La Crosse. And the first issue is, who is a child? And both the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People as well as the law of the state of Wisconsin defines a child as any person under the age of 18 years. The second question is who are mandatory reporters? And the statute contains a listing of a number of occupations, including doctors and patients and physicians and that sort of thing. But it also contains a listing of categories of persons who we have functioning in our diocesan institutions. And recently, the Wisconsin legislature has amended that list of mandatory reporters, and I want to go through that list now. And let me go through each of the categories, which is more extensive than what's listed here, but these are the ones that I believe address the functions that many of our agents carry out in our diocese. The first major change in the law was that now clergy and consecrated persons are mandatory reporters under the law. Previously, mandatory reporters have already included school teachers, school administrators, school counselors, child care workers, daycare providers, marriage and family therapists, or professional counselors. And so anyone who fits into that category is obligated as a matter of law to make a report when they have reasonable cause to suspect that a child has been or may be the subject of child sexual abuse. Now, what allegations should be reported? What is child sexual abuse? And it's very simple. There is no sexual activity which the law allows. And it doesn't require an act of sexual intercourse. It doesn't require physical beatings or abuse. All that's required is any type of sexual activity involving a child, and that child is a victim of child sexual abuse. And so if you, as a mandatory reporter, believe that a child has been the subject and been used as a sexual object, then that triggers a mandatory report. Now, what is the standard of certainty? This is always a difficult issue for people. How do you know? What is reasonable cause to suspect? And this is where you have to apply your good common sense to circumstances, because, frankly, child sexual abuse is sometimes very difficult to detect. So if you see signs in a child, for example, the physical signs, I mean, obvious bruising or bleeding in the genital area, these are all signs of potential child sexual abuse. If you see behavioral changes in a child, that should give rise to reasonable cause to suspect. From a perpetrator standpoint, if you see an adult who has an unusual preoccupation with spending time with young people or has an apparent pattern of isolation of one or another persons, these are all occasions in which at least a question should be raised and the issue should be addressed. When it comes down to determining whether or not you have reasonable cause to suspect that a child has been the subject of sexual abuse, you must always err on the safe side and make the report. Now, once that report is made, you should understand that the agencies to which you report are the county social service agencies who will treat your report in a confidential way. Now, there's one other matter that I want to address specifically, because we've been talking about the mandatory reporting law for the mandatory reporters, specifically clergy and consecrated persons, which have been added. But the law has also created a special reporting requirement with an additional requirement for members of the clergy. And I'm going to read it to you because it's a very specific requirement. And that says, a member of the clergy shall report, as provided in subsection 3, if the member of the clergy has reasonable cause, based upon observations made or information that he or she receives, to suspect that a member of the clergy has done any of the following. And if you will remember earlier, I said that in order for the mandatory reporting requirement to be triggered, one of the circumstances is the fact that the child is seen in the course of professional duties. But with regard to clergy and religious persons, you don't need to satisfy the requirement of actually having seen the child. If you receive information which you believe constitutes a suspicion that a child is the subject of sexual abuse, you must report under the statute. That obligation is personal. It can't be satisfied by anyone other than you in making that judgment. The procedures of both the Diocese of La Crosse are not options. They're mandatory. And just what I've been describing for you, the legal procedures I've been telling you about are not optional. They're mandatory. And so now I'm going to turn you over to Ellen Thorne, who will describe for you in greater detail the functionings of the Diocese of La Crosse Child Sexual Abuse Review Board.